Appreciate everyone joining this webcast today. I'll remind you all that this is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to everyone that is registered for the call, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. So welcome again. I'm Pat Soldano, President of Family Enterprise USA. We advocate for generationally owned family businesses and their lifetime of savings at a national level in Washington, D.C. We represent all sizes of business, small, medium, and large, and all industries. We work on tax and economic issues that affect the families of those businesses. Unlike trade associations, typically do not work on those issues. They work on the business issues. And that's why we have now partnered with over 9 trade associations, almost 100,000 members, working on the families issues of family businesses. And we really appreciate our partnership with those trade associations, in addition to all the work we're doing with the 40+ family business centers around the country. So today, I think this is a very interesting topic, especially to those of you in the family office space. And the topic is questions to consider before hiring a C-suite talent for your family office. And in this webcast, we're going to feature Linda Mack, a founder of Mack International. Linda and I have known each other for quite a long time. So Mack International is a premier executive search and consulting firm. We're going to talk about questions to ask to sides prior to launching a search, the one pivotal role you might lock in, how to sidestep those common pitfalls, and the surprising challenges presented by this new rising Gen Z and even these other generations, and what ways in which family offices might establish common ground. So Mack International, as I just said, is a premier executive search firm specializing in C-suite, retained executive search, and strategic consulting solutions to family offices, family investment firms, family enterprises on an international basis. Linda's clients range from first generation business owning wealth creators, entrepreneurs, building a family office for the first time, through multi-generational families of 6 generations or more. Her expertise across this spectrum enables the team to also help families anticipate and prepare for leadership and generational transitions, as well as establish effective governance, succession, and address other critical aspects to ensure long-term success and sustainability. Since founding the firm in 2002, Linda has built a reputation for guiding family clients to, quote, get it right the first time, every time, making sure each executive search assignment is embedded into a proprietary, holistic, and customized consulting process. So headquartered in Chicago since its inception, Linda has recently moved to West Palm Beach with her business, and her business takes her around the globe. So Linda, wonderful to have you join us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I thank Family Enterprise USA, which we're proud to be a sponsor of, for inviting me to be here this afternoon.
Well, we really appreciate that sponsorship very much, Linda. And I just want everyone to know that Linda, as I said earlier, and I've known each other a long time, Linda is kind of the go-to person in the family office space if you are looking to hire a C-suite executive. So let's get right into the questions, and we're going to today's webcast is going to be structured in a way which I'm going to ask questions of Linda. We have some questions from some of those of you who registered, and you can put questions in the chat if you like, as well as the Q&A, and we'll attempt to answer those as we go through this hour. So Linda, let's start by this building a successful family office, and you use the analogy of building a house. So can you explain that analogy?
Sure. I think as you think about building an office for the first time, particularly like a house, you don't just start building it brick by brick. You've really got to have a sense of what does this look like at the end. You know, you may have an architect, but you go through planning. You want to plan, what is a house? How many rooms is it going to have? So on and so forth. And you need a budget and so on and so forth. So same thing with a family office. Before you just start building it, you've got to really think about what is your vision for what this house is going to look like? Who are you building it for? What's your budget? What's your time frame? You know, in the case of the family office, you'll be thinking about what the organizational structure will be and a lot of other factors, which I'm sure we're going to talk about as we go through this conversation. But I think that the reason I like the house as an analogy is if you start building brick by brick, chances are you may have to dismantle and start over again if you haven't done the plan first in terms of what it's going to look like when it's finished and what it's going to cost. So I think it's a great way to think about building a family office and just pause and think about your plans first.
I think it's a really good analogy. And to your point, you really need a plan and a big plan if you're building a house or you're hiring a C-suite executive. That's a huge step. So maybe you could give us a couple of questions that families should think about and being able to answer before they start building this house.
I think the basic ones are kind of who are you building it for? And by that, I mean, is it for you today, your generation? Is it for future generations? You don't have to build it all on the same day, but that's your vision and your plan in terms of who are you building the house for in the future? Who are the scope of clients to be served? And that can be a little more involved question than it seems on the surface. What is the definition of a client? Is that just a bloodline family member? Is it their spouse? What about children? What about exes? What about a lot of things? So you think about who are the clients that are going to be served by this office that you're building. And then what are the scope of services you're going to provide to those clients? Again, that is a simpler answer on the surface than it might be when you really get into it. So for example, you know, we all think about finance, accounting, taxes, estate planning, investments, and so forth. What about bill pay? What about helping hire household staff? What about a number of things like that? So you've really got to be very, very thorough in your thinking about what the scope of services is. In many cases, that's a philosophical question as well. Do you want to teach the clients to fish for themselves, or do you want to fish for them? Many families take the position that the purpose of the office is to teach family members how to fish and maybe be a resource to them. In other cases, the family may want to do the fishing for them. There are no right or wrong answers here necessarily, but they've all got to be questions that you think through. And then finally, some of the questions preceding this cascade to what are you going to outsource versus provide from inside the family office? That has a big bearing on what the structure of the organization is going to be and how you're going to budget for the office itself versus for outsourcing to other parties, advisors and service providers. So I think those are key questions that, you know, again, going back to the analogy of the house, as you're working with the architect to be able to plan it out, those are the key questions you need to ask before you start building something and have to dismantle it.
Yeah, and good point. And the house that you're going to build and the plan for that house is very important when you consider what that person that you're going to hire, that C-suite person, is going to be all about. What are going to be their strengths, their talents? So obviously, all of the C-suite executives are important to a family office, but in particular, you talk about one role or one person that's critical to the organization. Can you tell us about that person?
We call it the expert generalist. Some people may like the term quarterback, but we like expert generalists because the person really needs to have knowledge across the whole continuum of wealth management services. We call it the horizontal spectrum. So that's finance, accounting, tax, investments, philanthropy, estate planning, and so forth. And importantly, they need to understand the interconnections between all those functional areas. You can't make an investment without taking into consideration taxes or estate plan or other considerations. So there are a lot of interactions. So we always say the expert generalist needs to not only be knowledgeable about that whole spectrum, but understand the nuances and the interconnections between them. We often say the person also needs to have the peripheral vision to know that when something happens 180 degrees to the right, what are the three things they need to be thinking about 180 degrees to the left so nothing falls through the cracks. The expert generalist is also the person, and this could be a family member, it could be a professional. The point is it's a role that's really important. The expert generalist also coordinates and facilitates with all the external advisors. The external advisors, by definition, may see very deep in their respective vertical, like estate planning or tax or whatever, but they don't see across the whole horizontal and down in all of the verticals. So that's where the expert generalist is particularly beneficial to the family in being able to coordinate with all those external advisors. Number one, making sure the family's best interests are being met, but also that when somebody may be working on a project for the family, they may see that one of the other advisors needs to be involved so that nothing falls through the cracks there. I think the other thing about the expert generalist is that by definition, they're not going to be a specialist in every vertical. They may be a specialist in one or more verticals, depending on what the needs are, depending on what's being insourced or outsourced. But the point is, they will be very resourceful. And when the unexpected comes up, they may not know all the answers, but they're going to know the right questions to ask, and they're going to have resources and know the right resources to tap to be able to get the information needed to make a wise recommendation or decision on behalf of the family.
Well, I really like the term expert generalist. And as you know, I was a family office executive for many, many years. And I think that's why this job is so unique and so difficult to hire for, because you truly have to be an expert in so many different areas. And that is how family offices are so unique from any other business model. So I really like that definition. And and again, I think that's why it's so difficult to hire someone for that position.
It is. We live in a world where people tend to specialize, and there's nothing
Right.
wrong with specializing, and those are very valuable for certain roles. But in order to be effective as the leader in a family office, you really do need to have that broader perspective and that, as we call it, the expert generalist background.
So let's talk about the actual hiring process, because families spend a lot of time and resources on hiring a C-suite executive. Maybe you could share with us maybe the top two reasons like that they fail to launch, as you call it.
Yeah. And I'd say based on our experience for many, many years of doing this, I'd say there are probably four reasons why they fail, but the top two always are: number one, a family will often hire someone who they know and trust. Could be an advisor, it could be somebody who is with their operating business, and that's wonderful. Trust is extraordinarily important, but it's not enough. If, most families are looking to hire someone who will be with them for the next 10 plus years in that leadership role. So you've got to be thinking about what the job is going to require over the next 10 years to enable them to successfully accomplish objectives. And what happens and why it fails is a family hires someone that they know and trust, who they know and trust, but unfortunately the person doesn't have the requisite skills, experience, and ability to do the job that needs to be done in that leadership role over the course of the next 10 years. So it doesn't work out. The second reason is that very often a family may hire someone who, as I call it, is a rock star, as the leader of someone else's family office, and they bring them over to theirs and they're a total failure because the culture fit isn't right. And culture fit is extraordinarily important, has many dimensions. It's not personality. A lot of people say personality, but it's a combination of many, many different dimensions. It's values, it's philosophies, it's communication style, it's leadership style, decision-making style, it's relationship style. There are a lot of different dimensions that play into why a situation may be successful or why, conversely, it didn't work out. But those are really, really important. And that I would say is the second biggest reason why things don't work out. Because I mentioned four, I'd say the third is bad process. Some families, and we hear it all the time from people in the market, they start the search process and they don't have a specific timetable that they stick to, so they can tell candidates where they're coming from, when they're going to call them back. They do call them back, and so on and so forth. So they can lose candidates very easily in that kind of a process. And the fourth is bad onboarding. I always tell the story, and we might get into this later, where you go to the market on Saturday and you buy this great plant that's about to bloom, And the guy who sells it to you tells you water it, give it sun, here's what you need to do, and it's going to bloom beautifully. So you take it home, you put it in your apartment, and then you wind up having to go out on a business trip for 5 days. You come back and the plant's dead. And you go back to the market and you say, hey, you sold me a defective plant. I would need, what's wrong with this plant? And the guy says, well, I would be very happy to replace it, but did you give it the food, water, and light and so forth that I told you it needed in order to bloom? And you go, no, but I had to go on a trip. Anyway, the point is, there are many people who come in and into an organization, but the onboarding plan is not designed to ensure the success of the person. And in the absence of that, people fail that could have and would have been very successful. So that's another important thing to keep in mind.
Well, so we should get into compensation because everybody wants to hear about compensation. And sure enough, we have a question in the chat about salary ranges. But there's more than just salary when we talk about compensation, and also the roles that the person's going to play in the C-suite roles. So talk to us about compensation and those other elements that go into retaining those C-suite executives.
I'd say number one, compensation is important. People need to know that they're being paid competitively, and that's very important. But I'll tell you that there are many reasons why people listen when a call is made by us to talk with them about a potential opportunity, or why they call us to initiate a conversation about making a move. And beyond compensation, there are a number of other areas. So a list, I would say off the top of my head, are number one, clear business mandate. Nothing more frustrating to someone to join in a C-suite role and to have confusion or lack of alignment about a business mandate. They're fired up to accomplish something, but there's not clarity in terms of what it is they're supposed to accomplish. Going closely aligned with that is having the authority and the resources commensurate with accountability to be able to accomplish that mandate. Nothing more frustrating to a higher performer than feeling like you've got one or two hands behind your back and you can't get the mandate done because you don't have the resources or authority commensurate with the accountability. Smooth succession and transitions in the family, very important. We get calls a lot of times that it's either succession and family transitions or governance are not sound and smooth and well thought out and well practiced. One thing to have it on paper, but it's got to work in practice as well. And those can be very big reasons why someone would choose to leave or listen to another opportunity. Onboarding plan, I mentioned before, we call it the plan for success. You bring someone in, particularly to a family. If there's not a good onboarding plan to ensure the success, the person's got to own it, but the family's also got to own it and ensure that the person's going to be successful. Professional and personal growth opportunities are important to people. Any high performer, again, wants to grow and learn and continue to develop. A lot of the people we hire, one of the key characteristics families are looking for is someone who's intellectually curious, a consistent learner, and so forth. So providing support and opportunity for these people to continue to grow and develop. And on compensation, I'd say that, it needs to be competitive. And I think there needs to be a much better understanding and education around compensation out in the marketplace. There's a lot of surveys out there and a lot of people, I think it would be helpful to learn how to better read surveys and assess benchmarking. But it's not just comp. If the comp's way off, yes, that's going to be an issue. But all these other factors are equally as important, I would say, when someone listens to us when we're presenting another opportunity or they're initiating contact with us to talk about making a move from where they are.
Let's delve into compensation and other benefits a little bit more. You and I almost started in this industry, and back then compensation was an issue because quite frankly, many family office executives were undercompensated because people didn't appreciate the expert generalists that you keep talking about and how difficult this job really was. And there was also things like, equity positions or ability to buy into deals and those kinds of things. Maybe you could just generally talk to us about where is compensation for family offices as it relates to let's say an investment firm or another similar organization? And what kind of other benefits are they looking for? Are they looking for profit sharing, equity positions? What other kind of benefits?
I'd say, first of all, the trend is very much, number one, I think that the information available in the marketplace has greatly enhanced. People talk to each other. So, families are much more competitive than they used to be. I'd say that, it used to be maybe they call five people and say, what do you pay? What do you pay? What do you pay? I mean, and they kind of do their benchmarking that way, very informally in the marketplace. Today, it's much more professional. I think, information is much more readily available. There are family office compensation surveys out there. Botoff Consulting does one that probably has the largest sample base in it and is best known. But so there are a lot of sources of information out there. I would say that the other trend in the market is that there are a lot more people coming in from the institutional markets to the private markets today, and that's private business and private family office type situations. And I think that's a function of a couple of things. Number one, family offices have professionalized and institutionalized quite a bit, particularly, and there's a correlation to the size of office and the professionalization and institutionalization, but they've definitely gone way up. It's not, and as Pat referenced, it's no longer thought of as this is the last stage of your career where you kind of coast out. Not so. These are demanding jobs. These are very professional. A family office is a professional services organization or a professional investment organization, and they expect the leader and the people there to have strong business, financial, investment acumen and to really lead it as a business, to be tech savvy, to be very strategic and proactive, not reactive. It's a very demanding position. So the compensation is competitive accordingly. Now, one of the things about compensation, and I just tell a quick story, is that very often someone will say, so what does a CIO earn? And I say, well, it could be 200,000 to 2 million plus. Tell me what they do. So one of the big things about trying to benchmark is you've really got to be careful about apples to apples comparisons. So on one end of the spectrum, let's just say, for example, the person is overseeing outside consultants and advisors who are doing everything from setting the investment policy to making the recommendations to pulling the trigger and doing the reporting and the trading and everything else. Okay, that's an oversight job. And there's no good or bad or right or wrong. They're just different. You go to the other end of the extreme and you've got a family office that's running everything in-house, including trading and direct investments and private equity and everything else. Those are two very different jobs. So we often say in the family office market that titles are meaningless because you really can't go by title. Two reasons. One, you've got to really go by content of the job and get apples to apples comparisons based on content if you want to get a good answer. And part of that too is that there's a lot of bleeding of titles, as we call it, in the family office market, meaning somebody may carry a title of CEO, but they may also functionally be the CIO, or they could be the CFO, but they're also, doing double duty on another. Probably the most pure titles are the CFO and the CIO, but certainly at the president level, at the COO level, at the CEO level, lots of blending of titles. So the main point of the comment is when you're looking at compensation, you really need to, before you make any decisions, you really need to be sure that you're benchmarking based on content to make sure you're getting a good comparison and a good benchmarking analysis. But definitely the trends, what we're seeing in the market particularly is a big trend toward long-term incentives being a component of the compensation structure. And that was not the case a long time ago. The three, generally it was formally base and bonuses were largely discretionary. They still are largely discretionary today, but I think there's a lot more qualitative and quantitative performance expectation built into that. But the big thing we see more of a trend toward is incorporating long-term incentives. Now, their top three, again, I'll reference the Botoff Consulting study because it's got a very large sample base. But the top three long-term incentives are supplemental deferred compensation, That tends to be very straightforward. It's an award granted every year. It may go into a 3 or 5 year vesting plan. You can design it however you want, but basically it's an award given, and that can be very helpful to accumulating wealth over time. And many families look to how do you enable your executives to accumulate wealth if they're going to be there till retirement. You want them to retire at a lifestyle that you think is appropriate. Second most common after deferred cash is co-invest. Co-invest is the opportunity for the person to be able to invest alongside the family with their own capital in investments that the family may be making. Typically, it's going to be on the same terms and pricing arrangement as the family has. It's a big benefit opportunity that families have to offer on the compensation front, because if somebody's working for Northern Trust or to pick any name, any company, public company, they can't do that. So this is one big thing a family has, and one thing that's very attractive to attracting and retaining people is the opportunity to co-invest. Sometimes families will enable leverage along with that, meaning the family will make available to the person a loan, generally with recourse, but the loan is at the AFR rate. It's the lowest rate the IRS will allow you to charge and still be able to deduct it. And that enables the person, let's just say I have $100 to invest myself. I could borrow on that line of credit the family makes available to me to be able to leverage that. You got to be very careful there, because the things can also go down. But the point is, that's a benefit. Some families I would say that we work with do not allow leverage. They will allow co-invest, but they don't leverage. They don't believe in it, and they're not going to let any employee of theirs use leverage. So these are all philosophical questions that vary by family. Third most widely used is carried interest, and that is typically going to be where there are direct investments. So as the family is making a direct investment or a private equity investment directly, they will let the person have a share of the carry, typically above a certain hurdle rate that they will get when the investment realizes. There are some families who have put some vesting provisions in the co-invest, because everything always has two sides to it. So let's just say carried interest. The other side of the coin there is that's great that you get a percentage of the interest in the equity deal that they're going into. The negative side of that coin is, when are you going to get it? Well, not till it's sold. So if the family's going to keep that for a long time, that can be a real challenge. Some families have put investing provisions, but we'll get calls from individuals who say, I'm ready to make a move. And I say, why? Well, there's no upside for me anymore. And I said, tell me more. Well, because we've fully allocated all of our capital into investments, and there's no new capital coming in, so there's no upside. And I say, how far are you vested, and what's your equity look like? And they said, well, it's great, except that if I never get it, what difference does it make? So anyway, these are all things to think about, but the markets are very much adapting and adopting a lot of structural kinds of compensation components that have emanated into the private markets from the institutional markets.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, not just the salary, but all of those additional ways that the family office executive can participate. And again, I think it's somewhat unique to the family office profession itself.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful. So let's talk about the actual search committee itself and the demographics of that search committee. As we know, the world has changed. Now there's less baby boomers than there are NextGen. And so how is the demographics of that search committee changing? And let's talk about what we're going to segue into in a minute, which is, how does the next gen, not just Gen Zers, but the next gen, all of them are going to participate, and how are you handling that within that search committee?
Yeah. So we often, when we go in to speak with a search committee and they're considering us, we generally will, and I kind of comically say this, but I look around the table and I say, where are they? And they say, where are who? And I say, where are the next gens? So, and then we get into a conversation. As we tell them, we can bring your ideal candidate to you that you're looking to join you for the next, 10 to 15 years in the leadership role. But we know that when they come in, the first thing they're gonna do is look around the table. And if they see a lot of older generation folks and no next gens, they are gonna disengage from the conversation because they want to know, if I'm gonna be here for the next 10 to 15 years, who's gonna be around this table over the course of the next 15 years? And who's gonna be deciding my performance metrics? Who's gonna be deciding my compensation? Who's gonna be deciding whether I even have a job or not anymore? Because we've heard plenty of stories where the older generation is no longer holding, the next generation has transitioned in to the governance structure as the decision makers. And the person who was picked by their older generation is not theirs. They didn't have a voice in it. They weren't involved in it, and that person gets dismissed and they go seek their own person. So good reasons. When we work with a family, we generally say our responsibility is to help them be ready to do a successful search. And to be ready to do a successful search means really being thoughtful about what the configuration of that search committee is, what their succession and governance plans are, and transition plans, because we know what questions the candidates are going to ask and where they're going to walk away. And that's not going to serve the family well to have to go back to the market again. So we are very, very, as we tell our families, we want to help them get positioned to be successful in doing the search. And based on having done this for so many years, we feel that we bring a lot of value because we know what the candidates are saying, and we know the questions they're going to ask, and we know the reasons why they disengage from the conversation.
Well, and we're talking about next gen, we're talking about obviously the Gen X, and then the sandwich generation, the millennials, and then the Gen Zs. They all play a role, to your point, depending on how big the family is, what the age of the family. And I totally agree with you, is that they're not part of that decision-making process. Things are going to probably not be successful, because what we've also learned is next gen doesn't look at the family office like us boomers looked at the family office. They do things differently. They're technology savvy. They're not going to sit in a conference room and look at a PowerPoint. They're going to want 24/7 investment results on their phone. They may be doing their own taxes. They may be doing their own bill pay, all the things that some of the things that the family office used to do. They may not even want those services. So back to your building the house. If you're gonna build a house, then you really need to define how is it going to serve, as you said, this generation. But if it's set up as a legacy, which many of them are, they need to serve the generations going forward. So tell us the challenges that you are facing with this next gen.
I'd say because our focus is at the C-suite level, we don't have the Zs yet who have gotten to that level. But I would say with the family, because communication is extraordinarily important, and communication across branches and down generations, up and down generations, is very, very important. We often hear, oh yeah, they don't have any work ethic. They don't have any appreciation for how hard their parents had to work or their grandparents had to work to get anything. They're just entitled. I heard one funny way of putting it. They were born on third base and they think they ran the three bases to get there, but they didn't. They just got it. So, but I think that, it's one thing to dismiss them, but it's another thing. And I think those who are successfully navigating the challenges here are the ones who are really listening, and engaging them. You kind of have to meet them where they are. What will get them interested? What will get them wanting to participate? It may be an internship. It could be, but I talked with a young Zer this morning, and they were using terminology. They've been brought into the fold by their parents and grandparents, and they're using terminology about governance and so forth that was very surprising. It was a great conversation, but I think it's engaging and it's listening, and it's not, they're not going to do it your way, so they're going to resist. And the last thing you want is for the family office or the family to break up and they say, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm going to go do it myself or whatever. So I think, like anything else, it's like the family dinner conversation or example I used to always give is, when you were at the family table for dinner every night, you talked about things. It was an hour to talk about things. You could disagree about things, but you were communicating. And today, everybody's going in different directions. Everybody's busy. Everybody's, we talk to so many families, they don't have time to meet anymore. They do it on Zoom. But that communication is so important, and the listening is so important, and looking for opportunities to engage the next gens, find out what they're interested in. Let them experiment with it. Let them engage in it. Try to, maybe turn it to something that could be valuable to the family. But the biggest thing is, once they start listening, they'll start listening to your point of view. And if you listen to their point of view, you'll learn how to engage them better, I think.
Yeah, and to your point, I think you're aware, Family Enterprise USA did a survey with Cornell and the Roberts Group, and we surveyed NextGen. They were taking family business management class in various universities, and their number one issue in terms of what is their top concern with the family business, it wasn't about profitability, it wasn't about succession, it was about communication. So I can't agree with you more on that. It's critically important. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, the biggest thing we hear when we do a search, before we start drafting a position description or anything, we do what we call a 360, meaning that we want to speak with everyone with whom the position will need to work or collaborate to be effective and successful. And we don't start a search unless the next gens are included in this conversation. But it's very interesting as we're talking with them and listening to what they would describe as the ideal candidate and what would be important to provide value. Biggest thing we hear is, listen, I don't feel anybody listens to me. When I bring up an idea, first of all, I don't feel comfortable bringing it up because the older generation in the room always puts it down as a stupid idea, or I don't know what I'm talking about. So they say, I want a voice. I want to be heard. I want someone to at least listen to me and consider my point of view. So it's really, back to your point, it's so important, because if they shut down or they shut off, that's not going to be a good outcome in the long term. That does not promote family sustainability or legacy or anything else.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And to follow up on that, as you're well aware, Family Enterprise USA partnered with Frank Luntz to do a focus group. Most people know Frank's famous for his focus groups. We focused students in school and out of school that were 18 to 29-year-olds. We wanted to get a sense of what they thought about capitalism versus socialism. And we wanted to learn that because, as you're well aware, we work on tax and economic policy, and we want to know, what do they think about that? What do they think about the economy? What do they think about the country as a country that fosters business? And we have clips from that video if anybody wants to see it on our YouTube channel, and it's on CNN and CNNBC. But it was such an eye-opener to me because we had 21 of these students on a focus group on Zoom, and we asked them, what do you think about socialism versus capitalism? And explained what socialism really meant, because it wasn't so much I'm pro-socialism as I'm anti-capitalism. So it was very eye-opening to us. And then we asked them, okay, well, what do you think about a social meritocracy versus equality? And there was an inconsistent answer in what they told us, because they said, we gave the example, Frank gave the example of, if you think you're a waiter, and if you're working as a waitress and a waiter and you get tips, should that tips be pooled, or should they be distributed as you earn them? And 100% of these students said, I think they should be distributed as you earn, so they should not be pooled. And yet we said, do you understand that is, meritocracy? And that is what the United States is built on, and that's what capitalism is built on. And once again, it was a disconnect. So I'm bringing that all up because I wanted to know, what are you hearing about the challenges within those groups, and how to talk about business with the next gen, because many of them are anti-business and anti-capitalism.
I happen to be a huge proponent. I grew up in a third generation family business. I'm a sponsor of Family Enterprise USA. I work with families for a living. I am such a proponent of family business. I love to tell stories all the time. I'll tell you two quick ones. One, we have a client who they were rescued from Auschwitz. The end of the war, the whole family had been killed. They were the last one alive. They were on their way to the death chamber, and they got a knock on their cell, and it was a black and a white serviceman from the U.S. saying, "We're here to liberate you. The war is over." And they saved this person. They got him to New York, and he is now on the West Coast and a multi-billion-dollar real estate developer. Put his head down, absolutely says this is the land of opportunity like no place else in the world. And believe me, this person did not come from wealth, did not have entitlement. Nobody helped them. He built it himself. Another family we work for in the Southeast, they grew up with no indoor plumbing. They had nothing, 2 nickels to rub in the dirt, nothing. And they managed to, two brothers, build a business. They became multi-billionaires. And in both these cases, I mean, this is not taking something from someone. They did it the hard way. They built it from scratch. They inculcate values in their families around how valuable the U.S. opportunity is, about values, about giving back, about philanthropy. One of the common traits we see in all the families we work with, they're good to their employees. We've talked about this, Pat, is that when the economy gets bad, when there's a recession, the families tend to hold on to their employees. They don't cut them and slash and burn like, I mean, a lot of the big public companies do. They're more aligned with and more, they treat their employees like extended family. They're good to their communities. They're very philanthropic. So I would say too, I think we see well, I think there are way too many examples out there of people like, pick them in Hollywood or on Wall Street or something, and they're flashy and fancy and they've got big planes and so forth, versus the private families and how they built. We're doing a search now for somebody who is going to come into a lot of wealth. They didn't have 2 nickels to rub to their name. It happens to be in the oil and gas industry, and they were in the oil patch. Never have had any liquidity, and now they will have liquidity. And what they care about is being able to preserve and protect it for future generations and do something philanthropic with it. So I think, back to your point, I think that I think there's a lot of pop culture out there that talks about capitalism as bad. I would say if you talk to virtually anyone around the world, they say that we are so blessed to have live in the land of opportunity. And I mean, people can make it. They can get an education. In this country, there is capital looking for good ideas. People can get financed to build something. A lot of where these people came from, that's how they got it. So
Yeah. Well, and I think somewhat in their defense on this particular focus group, many of these students and young people were suffering because they've got student debt. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. They can't pay their rent. Inflation and other things have created problems for them. And I get that. And so they blame capitalism to some extent. But I want to bring this conversation back into how are the family offices dealing with NextGen? Are they generally doing, as you say, which is involving them and communicating with them? Or are they just starting to do that? Or do they get it? Or is it still a hurdle?
I think it depends on the family, like anything else, depends on the family. I think the sooner you start to get them involved in something, the easier it becomes. So we know families that when the kids all start, they start with a value system that parents inculcate in them. So they know that, for example, there's one family we know, there will not be any distributions from any trust until they're in their late 30s or early 40s. Every child, when they are young, knows that this is just the way the family works. So they're going to have to buy their own house, the first house, and buy their own first car, and they're going to have to struggle, and that's the whole point of it. But they've grown up that way. There are other families that have grown up that way. they have a value system. I'd say it's more challenging when you start later with the children. But as the saying goes, you start from where you are and you just go from there. It's never too late to start. So I think it's just finding ways to mentor, to engage in conversation. Many people have found that through philanthropy or through family history of the family business or something, that's a way to get people engaged. You got to make it fun and interesting. A lot of the younger generation may not be excited about investments. They may be more excited about philanthropy or something else. So you got to find a hook that's going to engage them and mentor them and bring them into the fold. And I think that it can be more challenging the older they are, but who doesn't want to be invited to be included in something and to have their voice heard? I'd say that goes a long way.
Yeah, I would agree. And so we do have a question in the Q&A that I think is a very good one. Thank you, Steve, for this question. And I think you're absolutely the person to answer this, Linda. And that is, what characteristics, backgrounds, experience tend to make the best expert generalists?
First of all, by definition, that they got to have a broad background. They didn't just grow up in a silo. So I'd say that, I'll give you a straw man. Let's just say somebody started in public accounting and they worked for one of the big four and they got great grounding in processes and procedures and controls and budgeting and taxes and so forth. And then they went on to work for a private family business, or they went to work for a multifamily office, or they went to work for a bank or something. And they got broader experience and they added some exposure to investments and other things. They got client facing experience and so forth. Because at the end of the day, that job of the expert, the head of the office, is going to be, on the one hand, they're responsible for building and leading a successful professional services business that is delivering services to the family clients such that those clients want to do business with the office. So even if they're in trust, if you got unhappy clients, it's not going to be a happy situation. And then the other side is that you've got to be the trusted advisor to family members individually and to the family as a whole. So I would say you back up from there and say you want to have good grounding in that finance, accounting, tax. Many people will have gotten it early in their career. They may have gone to a consulting role. They may have gone to a financial institution or an investment place, and they've gotten a broader experience there. They've gotten client experience so that they've got that trusted advisor experience, but they've been in several places to be able to broaden out their background. And so that's how I would answer the question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. So along those lines, one of the questions of someone that registered for this webcast said, when is the best time to tell your staff that you're looking for the new replacement family office head or CEO in the office?
Well, I guess the question I would ask there is, does the CEO know? Because I would assume, because I might answer the question differently, but I'd say that let's just assume, I would never advise you to go out to market on a search. Some people do it, but I'm not an advisor of it, without the incumbent knowing that they're going to be replaced. Things just aren't private out there. Someone's going to find out, it's going to boomerang on you, and we've seen some very sad stories. So having said that, and let's just say, assuming the CEO is going to be moving on to another opportunity or retiring or whatever the case may be, I think as far as when is the best time, and maybe the person who asked the question, okay, I see, yes, he knows. Okay. So that makes it much easier. I think that, you don't want to cause disruption, but I think you've got to assume that people are pretty good about handling information if they know that there's a plan. Okay. So we talk to, as part of our 360s, when we're doing a search for a CEO, for example, we talk to the staff people and we are getting their input about what that ideal person would look like and who could bring the most value. And then we're also explaining what the process and the timeline are, so they know what's going on and they're not worried or upset about, where does that leave me? I'm not sure exactly where your question was heading, like, where does that leave me? Would I be a potential successor or any of those kinds of things? If the person is a potential successor, we like to include them in the mix. And with total respect, treat them like any other candidate, put them through the full interview and evaluation process. And as we would tell the search committee, if you know that you've gotten your opportunity, and you get honest feedback about if you didn't get it, why you didn't get it, then hopefully that person is going to view the person who comes in as the one that they can learn from, grow with, and develop under, and then get their job or another one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I always believe more communication is better than less. So Dan has a question in the Q&A, and I'll preface this by saying education is becoming more and more important. When I get questions asked around family office and what services are needed, usually governance and education is at the top of the list.
Right.
And the education usually revolves around the NextGen or family members, but his question relates more, I think, around the professional themselves in the office. So he says, as a family office continues to scale and grow, are they also professionalizing the educational offering as well, i.e. hiring CLOs or fractional CLOs?
And CLO, you mean Chief Learning Officer?
I assume so.
I think we have not seen people hiring CLOs yet as to have them full-time on staff to build a curriculum for people. I think that will probably somewhat correlate with the size of the office. But I think that there are many ways to access it. And I think somebody in the office, that would be the job of the expert generalist, if nobody else, the leader of the office, to be thinking about how to continue to develop staff and provide educational opportunities so that they grow and develop. And that could be through, I think the more structured and organized, the better, not just slipshod, but to have a focus and a strategic plan around it. What should they be developing in terms of skills? Where? Do you bring in a consultant and teach in-house? Do you send people to external education, seminars, whatever? And that goes for family. Family as well. What kind of educational opportunities and development needs do they have? And how do you build either a curriculum in-house or use external resources to either come in-house and teach it or send people externally to get the education? So I think there are a number of different solutions around there, but I think it's important.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's a great answer. So talking about where we are with the world today, the world has become much more diverse. Families are becoming more diverse. And so the question from somebody who registered for the call says, how does this change in diversity in all aspects? How does this trend impact C-suite recruiting for the family office?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? How does the trend?
So how does this, diversity that we're facing and this kind of pressure to address diversity, and especially if the family's diverse, how does that impact the hiring for that C-suite executive?
I think it's your strategy to go to market. So I think if you are seeking, whatever your criteria are that you are going to market, and if one of those important criteria is diversity, and that could mean a number of different things, but whatever that is, you need to be sure that you are mounting a strategy in the market. If that's what you're looking for, where are they? So that's how you're going to map out your strategy for how you're going to find the person. You first define exactly what you're looking for, and that's going to be experience and skills and qualifications and so forth. And then when you include the diversity component, and I think you include that as the criteria, and that then transcends into the strategy of where you're going in the market. Now, if you find a limited market with whatever criteria you're defining, then you've got to either expand your market or relax some of your requirements to enlarge the market of possibilities for you. Some families, for example, may diminish their market so much because they say, I only want someone who lives within 50 miles of here. Well, you know what? That's going to be a very limited universe. And then add that some of the other criteria, or whether it's diversity or not, somehow you've got to, as we're working with someone, we want to know exactly what we're looking for, map out a strategy for it, and then try to make that universe of possibilities as large as it can possibly be. And we say you can always cut it down later, but make it large so you've got a high chance of success in getting a hit.
Yeah, that's a really good idea and a great suggestion. So we're almost out of time. We have one last question. It's from Steve. Again, another great question, Steve. So he says, what type of family office do you see becoming the most popular in the single family office space? Oversight, outsourcing, financial only, compliance only, or full service in-house?
I would say the short answer, and it's not being facetious, but when you've seen one family, you've seen one family. I think the model that's going to serve the family best is the one who goes through that thought process that we talked about at the beginning, and they decide on what house is going to best serve them. Are they going to rent it? Are they going to buy it? Is it going to have 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms or whatnot? But I really do think that when we work with any family, it's going through those questions and it's trying to think through from the family standpoint, what is going to best serve them and best serve them short term and long term. Because, for example, you may decide to outsource things short term. You get a big liquidity event. You're not going to decide on everything day one. Just park it. Get some good advisors and get things stabilized. And then you can decide later on. Investments is the biggest thing. Outsource it for the time being. And then if you decide to insource it, you can always do that later. But to insource something prematurely and then have to dismantle it that's the worst place to be.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So, Linda, we're out of time. Really appreciate this conversation. I'm glad we had some good interaction here from everyone that was attending. So appreciate your time. Appreciate everyone else on this webcast today.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody who joined this afternoon. And thank you, Feminine Enterprise USA.
You're very welcome. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day. Take care.